What's going on, baseball fans? How are we doing? So the trade deadline is fast approaching. We just saw Max Scherzer and Trey Turner get traded last night. So in this video, I wanted to put together my top 10 favorite trades to ever happen by the trade deadline. Let's go take a look. Starting off my list at number 10, I have Chris Archer going to the Pirates and going back to the Rays. I have Austin Meadows, Tyler Glasnow, and Shane Baz. So this is the most recent trade on this list, but I think it is already quite a doozy. Chris Archer never ended up doing anything with the Pirates. He went back to the Rays, actually, and Austin Meadows and Tyler Glasnow have proven to be quite amazing players for the Rays. Tyler Glasnow was having a sensational season before going down this year with some forearm issues. Hopefully he's going to be back rather soon, but he was having a really good year. Just pitched in the World Series last year, was really good a couple of years ago. And then Austin Meadows has proven to be one of the more solid players in the game, especially this season. 243 average, 20 home runs, 76 RBIs. And they also got Shane Baz, who's a pitching prospect on the rise in the Rays system. To me, this is easily one of the best trades of all time because these two players have already made it to a World Series with the Rays. Chris Archer didn't do anything with the Pirates and is already back with the Rays. So that's what I have starting off this list. Coming in at number 9, I have Randy Johnson going to the Houston Astros and going back to the Mariners in this trade back in 1998. You had Freddie Garcia, Carlos Guillen, and John Halama. This ended up being a pretty good trade for the Mariners as well, but this trade for the Astros was huge. If we go take a look at that rotation back in 1998, you had guys like Shane Reynolds, Jose Lima, Mike Hampton, Sean Bergman, but Randy Johnson, coming into this rotation, he was having a phenomenal year up to that point. If we go take a look at the numbers with Randy Johnson in 1998 with Seattle, I mean, he was actually not off to a great start. 9-10, he had a 4.33 ERA. The FIP looked a lot better at 3.35, but he was still striking out a lot of guys. But when he went to the Astros, he was absolutely phenomenal. 10-1, a 1.28 ERA, a 2.04 FIP, was still striking out a ton of guys. And if we go take a look at the wins above replacement, that year with the Astros, he put together a 4.3 WAR just for the Astros alone. The Astros ended up being able to win the division that year pretty handedly. They ended up losing in the playoffs, but to me, I mean, this was one of the greatest runs in the second half that I think we'll ever see. Randy Johnson, I think a lot of people forget that he was once a Houston Astro. And since we're talking about pitchers that made a great run in the second half, let's move on to another one. CC Sabathia in 2008 being traded from the Cleveland Indians to the Milwaukee Brewers. So here was the trade. Going back to the Brewers, you had Zach Johnson, Matt Laporta, Rob Bryson, and then a player to be named later, which ended up being Michael Brantley, who was a very solid player and still is one of the more solid players in today's game. But CC Sabathia went on a run for the ages with the Brewers that year. If we go take a look with Cleveland, I mean, he was doing fine for the most part. He was 6-8, a 3.83 ERA with a 3.41 FIP, but when he went to the Brewers, he took his game to another level. 11-2, 1.65 ERA. I mean, good grief, a 2.44 FIP. CC Sabathia was on a run for the ages, and if we take a look at the wins above replacement on Baseball Reference, he had a 4.9 WAR down the stretch. He basically put the Milwaukee Brewers on his back and carried them to the playoffs. Ended up getting himself a nice, juicy contract with the Yankees after that season. So CC Sabathia, I personally think this is one of the best trade deadline deals to ever happen. Coming in at number 7, I have Johnny Cueto going to the Cincinnati Reds back in 2015. In this trade, going back to the Royals, we had Brandon Finnegan, John Lamb, and Cody Reed. Really, neither of those players ended up doing anything for the Royals. If we go take a look at Johnny Cueto back in 2015, he actually wasn't really having a great run. He was really good with the Reds in that first half of the season. When he went to the Royals, wasn't very good, a 4.76 ERA. FIP wasn't bad, but it was still a 4.06. So Johnny Cueto ended up not really being anything amazing with the Royals in that regular season, but why he makes this list for me is because he really helped the Royals win a World Series that year. If you go take a look here, he had a couple of good starts in the playoffs that year. In the division series against Houston, he had 8 solid innings of 2-run ball, and in the World Series against the Mets, he threw a complete game, only gave up 1 run. So Johnny Cueto, because of this, to me, I think deserves a spot on this list. Johnny Cueto, sure, didn't really have, a great regular season, but he really turned it on when it counted. That's why they brought him to Kansas City, was to help them win a World Series, and he did exactly that. Moving on to number 6, we're going to go back to the early 2000s when the Indians traded David Justice to the Yankees. David Justice on the Yankees ended up being a vital move for them in the playoffs. Again, this trade happened in 2000. Going back to the Indians was Ricky Leday, Jake Westbrook, and Zach Day. So Jake Westbrook ended up being a pretty nice pickup for the Indians, but David Justice was really good for the Yankees in the year 2000. If we go take a look at his numbers in those 78 games for the Yankees, he hit 305, a 391 on base, a 585 slugging, had those 20 home runs, had the 60 RBIs, but he turned it on when it counted. If we go take a look at his numbers from the postseason that year, I mean, he was extremely good in the postseason, won the ALCS MVP, and I mean, for good reason. If you take a look at his stats that series, while the average wasn't very high, the on base wasn't very high, he had some clutch hits in that series, had a couple of home runs, had 8 RBIs, so ended up being a really key player for the Yankees that year. And also just had himself a really good second half of the season with them. So David Justice winning the ALCS MVP that year, helping them win a World Series. I think David Justice easily deserves a spot on this list. Since we're talking about the Yankees, let's stick with them. Let's have at number 5, the Yankees trading AROLDIS Chapman to the Cubs back in 2016. This ended up being a huge move for the Cubs. Going back to the Yankees, actually a part of that deal, you had Gleyber Torres, who is currently the Yankees starting shortstop. He was one of the top prospects in the game at that point. But what ended up making this, even better it was great for the Cubs, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but AROLDIS Chapman ended up going back to the Yankees, so I think both teams won this deal. If we go take a look at the numbers, though, with Chapman with the Cubs in 2016, this guy was electric for them down the stretch. I mean, the Cubs, they handedly won the division that year, but Chapman definitely provided definitely a big boost. A 1.01 ERA in 2016 for the Cubs, 0.82 FIP, 15 strikeouts per 9. But AROLDIS Chapman, he did have his struggles a little bit in the postseason that year, but because of the arm, that type of an arm coming out of the bullpen for the Cubs, he really was, in my opinion, huge for the Cubs. Sure, he gave up, a pretty big, key home run in that Game 7 of the World Series. If we go take a look at his stats, though, in that 2016 playoffs, I mean, for the most part, this guy, he threw a lot of innings in that World Series, almost 8 innings pitched out of the bullpen in that World Series, but he was really solid for them in the division series, in the championship series. I think, without Chapman, who knows how far the Cubs could have gone. He provided key innings in that postseason, and I think one of the best trades of all time. Coming in at number 4, I have my Red Sox getting involved here when they traded Nomar Garciaparra to the Cubs. So with Nomar going to the Cubs that year, I'll tell you this as a Red Sox fan, it was stunning to see Nomar Garciaparra get traded. I mean, this was an icon in Boston. He was their guy. I mean, this was the guy in Boston, Nomar Garciaparra. However, in the year 2004, the contract was coming up. The Red Sox had to do something that they weren't seeing eye to eye on the contract extension. I mean, it was getting a little nasty with Nomar and the Red Sox. It was a relationship that was souring. The Red Sox that year, though, they were needing to find a way, to improve that team. This was a team that was trying to win a World Series for the first time since 1918. And if we take a look at the Red Sox that year, up to this trade, or up to the point of this trade, the Red Sox were 29th in defense. So Nomar was not providing good defense at shortstop. So with him, eventually being a free agent, they decided to make the move, and they traded Nomar Garciaparra, and in return, it was a 3-way deal. They were able to bring in Orlando Cabrera and Doug Minkiewicz. I mean, these guys weren't really superstar players by any means, but they provided really solid defense. Orlando Cabrera actually was pretty decent with the bat down the stretch for the Red Sox that year. Hit 294 down the stretch. He had a 320 on base. Had a key home run, a couple of key home runs for them. But he just provided really solid defense. He brought a bit of a mojo to this team as well. And for the Red Sox, the rest is history, winning the World Series in 2004. While the Red Sox didn't really bring in any superstar players here, I really think this trade really kind of just put that team together. It was just the final touches on a World Series winning team. So Nomar Garciaparra, I'll always love him, one of my favorite players of all time. But to me, I think this was one of the greatest trades of all time because, hey, it helped end an 86-year-old curse. Coming in at number 3, I have the A's trading Matt Holliday to the St. Louis Cardinals. So this trade happened back in 2009. Going back to the A's, you had Clayton Mortensen, Shane Peterson, and Brett Wallace. So Matt Holliday ended up having a very good run with the St. Louis Cardinals. If we go take a look here, with his 8 years on the Cardinals, he hit .293, a .380 on base. This guy helped win a World Series in 2011. He won a National League Championship Series. Well, no, that was with the Rockies. I apologize. But he helped win the 2011 World Series that year for the St. Louis Cardinals. He had just a lot of good seasons with the Cardinals. Some, not really anything close to an MVP award, but he was a multiple-time All-Star. Really helped them in the postseason. Matt Holliday, to me, was just a really solid player. I feel like one of the more underrated pickups by the trade deadline. I feel like you never hear about Matt Holliday going to the Cardinals, so I think he deserves a lot of credit. He had a good run with the Cardinals. If we take a look at the wins above replacement that he put together a 23.1 WAR with the Cardinals over those 8 years. That's really solid. So Matt Holliday comes in at number 3 on my list. Coming in at number 2 on my list, I have the Phillies trading Curt Schilling to the Diamondbacks. So let's go take a look at this trade. So this happened in the year 2000. Going back to the Phillies, you had Omar Dahl, Nelson Figueroa, Travis Lee, and Vicente Badia. That package never really did too much for the Phillies that year, and it didn't really do much for the Diamondbacks at first, but it really helped them in the next season. Curt Schilling ended up being just really good for the Arizona Diamondbacks. If you go take a look, for the Diamondbacks in 2001, this guy finished second in Cy Young voting. He also finished second in Cy Young voting in the next season in 2002. But most importantly, he helped win a World Series. He was huge in that postseason for the Diamondbacks. Pitched in Game 7. He threw a great game in Game 7. Ended up getting co-MVP of the World Series with Randy Johnson that year. Curt Schilling, in my personal opinion, I believe this is a guy that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. This guy just had a really solid career. But with the Diamondbacks, if you go take a look, with the Diamondbacks in 4 years, this guy had a 25.9 wins above replacement. Ended up, moving on to the Red Sox down the road, helped win another couple of World Series with them. But with the Diamondbacks, this was a guy, the Diamondbacks were an expansion franchise in 1998 and then helped them win a World Series just a few years later. So Curt Schilling, this guy was huge for the Diamondbacks. This was a great trade all around. Hey, helped win the Diamondbacks win a World Series, so you can't really argue against that. But coming in at number 1 on my list, I have the Cubs trading Lou Brock to the St. Louis Cardinals. Let's go take a look at this trade. You have to go all the way back to 1964 for this trade. Going back to the Chicago Cubs, you had Ernie Broglio, Bobby Shantz, and Doug Clemens. These guys ended up not really doing anything for the Chicago Cubs, but for Lou Brock, ended up putting together a Hall of Fame career. He was a 6-time All-Star, won a couple of World Series with the Cardinals. This guy was just full of speed. He really helped reinvent the game by providing some speed. It took Rickey Henderson to be able to break his stolen base record. Lou Brock was just a phenomenal player. If we go take a look at his career stats, 45.3 wins above replacement for his career total, 938 stolen bases, a 343 on base, a 293 career batting average. Again, only had a few seasons with the Chicago Cubs before getting traded. And you have to, and at this time as well, the trade deadline was actually in June at this time, so it was a lot sooner. But he had a long and very successful career with the St. Louis Cardinals. In my opinion, Lou Brock getting traded to the Cardinals is the best trade deadline deal of all time. So let me know what you think down below in the comments. Did I leave any trades off of this list? Let me know. But that's all I have for right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.